to the latest episode of the Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Right, okay, so this week, no apologies, but yeah, we're looking at Langatun again. This is the second time that I've looked at this particular distillery, and why? Because it's good. I love what they're doing. I love the whiskies. So I've finally got enough samples together to warrant doing another episode of the show. And you might remember from last time I looked at just the standard two bottlings that they did, the Old Deer and the Old Bear, both the 46% bottlings and the cask strength bottlings. But this week I've managed to, over a period of time I should say, I've managed to collect together the more limited edition bottlings that the distillery have been doing over the last year or so. So hopefully this should be really interesting. I mean, one of the things I love about the distillery is its unique character, and what I'm always looking for with spirits is, whether they're whiskey or rum or what have you, is whether they have a sort of a unique sort of identifiable characteristic, whether that's due to the raw materials they use, the production methods, what oak they use, that kind of thing. Just something that makes them sort of a little bit different, so it stands out from the crowd. There's plenty of whiskies, for example, that are pleasant, but essentially fairly unremarkable, and I don't think that's something that you could certainly say about the Langatun distillery. So their whiskies are, like I said, pretty unique. And I just remember the first time I tasted them thinking, wow, this is just something really different. And I believe that they're gaining in popularity. Certainly I've seen lots of social media stuff, reviews and things like that are saying exactly the same thing, that the whiskies are very, very good. So if you've yet to have tried them, then hopefully this will encourage you to do so, because I think they're definitely worth tasting. So in the last episode, or the first episode of the show I did on the Langatun, obviously we went through the history, and so I don't think there's any real necessity to go back on that. So I'm just going to introduce this afternoon's lineup. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off with the two standard bottlings that the distillery does. Now, when I first decided I was going to do this, I thought that these two samples were actually the sort of like the standard 46% bottlings, but they're not actually. They're the cask strength bottling. So I'm probably doing this the wrong way round, as I normally tend to do them. The samples in lowest to the highest in ABV, but because these are the two, like I said, standard distillery bottlings, I thought it would be better to start with those, and then we'll look at the single cask and small batch bottlings that the distillery have done. So we're going to kick off with the Old Deer, which is bottled at 62.8. It's triple distilled spirit aged in a combination of ex-sherry and ex-chardonnay casks. Then we're going to look at the Old Bear, which is their peated, or their smoky one, as they say. Again, this is the cask strength bottling at 62.4%. and is aged in red ex-Chateauneuf de Pape casks. Now, as you know, wine and peat tend to be an odd combination. They can be quite mad, or they can be quite bad, as to be said, but we shall see which category this falls into. But as you know, we already stock it, so it's not going to be in the bad category, is it? So then we're going to move on to the first of the four limited edition bottlings that the distillery has done. Now, depending upon what website you look at, this is either the White House malt or it's the 2016 election whiskey. I don't know. But either way, that's what it was bottled for. It's bottled at 45%, and the spirit was distilled in 2010, October, bottled in November of 2016, so it's 6 years old, and has been matured in a combination of Chardonnay and Chateauneuf casks. So could be interesting. Like I said, when I heard about it on social media, it had been bottled for Donald Trump, I was thinking, yep, that's going to be a flashy start and a bit of a bitter ending, I imagine. But anyway, we shall find out in due course. The second bottling we'll be looking at is called the Winter Wedding, which is this is the 2016 release. Bottled at 46%, spirit distilled in 2011. It's 5 years old and is a combination of the Old Bear and the Old Deer. So obviously it should hopefully sort of have the characteristics of both of those spirits, and it'll be interesting to see how the heavy or not so heavy as the case may be, the peat influences once it's been blended with the Old Deer. And then we're going to move on, and this is the first of two single cask bottlings. Now I'm probably going to murder the name of this. This particular bottling is the 400 Years Kornhaus. It was bottled at 49.12%. ABV, it has to be said, but there you go. It was bottled for the 400th anniversary of the distillery buildings, which were originally a granary, so Kornhaus. Yeah. And it was distilled in November of 2008, bottled in May of last year, and is a single Chardonnay cask, cask number 45. And the final bottling we'll be looking at, again, is a single cask. This time this bottling is called the Jacob's Dram, and was a single Pinot Noir cask. Again, bottled at 49.12. It was distilled in September of 2009 and bottled in June of 2016. Like I said, it was a single Pinot Noir cask, cask number 97, and has been bottled, I don't know whether it was an anniversary or something like that, but it's been bottled to commemorate the founder of the distillery, a chap called Jacob Bamberger. So I don't know whether, I'm guessing there must have been some kind of anniversary tied in with it. I can't imagine the distillery just decided to bottle that for the hell of it, but there you have it. That's the Jacob's Dram. So let's kick off with quite an alcoholic Old Deer then.
I'm addicted to you. You have nothing to lose.
Okay, so let's see what the next good is then, shall we? It has that wonderful herbal character. Plenty of barley notes. There's a little bit of wininess and just a sort of a touch of sweet vanilla. Almost kind of like vanilla pod. Really creamy. It's a lovely nose, and that sort of herbal note just reminds me of Provençal herbs, and this is one of the things that really attracted me to this particular whiskey, was this kind of herbal Provençal-y kind of character. And I was just thinking, this is just so unusual. I've just never tasted or smelled anything quite like it. The ex-sherry cask are adding a little bit of dried fruit, a little bit of licorice. There's a touch of tar possibly just underneath that, but all the while it's that sort of herbally kind of character. I mean, obviously the sherry cask is possibly emphasising that herbalness, but from what I can remember, it was certainly distinctive in all of their, but well, certainly in the Old Deer, shall we say. So it's really deep. It's got a nice kind of, it's not overly mature. I mean, this is relatively young spirit. I mean, certainly being bottled at sort of over 60%, you don't expect it to be particularly old, shall we say, not with that kind of level of alcohol, even if it is being sort of matured in sort of tighter grained European oak. But that's just a really lovely nose. Let's see what the palate's like. quite drying on the finish, but then that's obvious because of the alcohol level. Kicks off more with the sherry, so you're getting a lot more dried fruit, raisins, sort of sultana, more towards the lighter end of the dried fruits. Touch of dried apricots and barley. Lovely creaminess on the finish, which I'm guessing is probably more from the ex-Chardonnay casks, with that sort of slightly sort of buttery, winey creaminess. But all the while, again, you're getting that kind of Provençal herbal kind of character, which I think is really, really nice, really appealing. Great depth, good length for such a, you know, a sort of a powerful alcoholic whiskey. So yeah, that's a good starter, I think. Initially, I wasn't going to bother putting a little drop of water with it because I didn't think I was going to leave enough to warrant doing it. But there's a little bit left in the glass, so let's just put a little drop of water with it and see what happens. Getting a lot more chocolatey now, lightly coffee, getting a lot of more mashed honey cereal kind of notes. Still really, really deep. It seems to have brought out the sherry component a little bit more, but still really herbal. Let's see what the palate's now doing. Again, more chocolatey, quite malty in actual fact now. Lovely density to the spirit. Maybe not quite so complex. The sherry is kind of softened, but it's still there. I'm not quite getting so much of the Chardonnay butteriness on the finish now. The sherry seems to have sort of kind of, although it is less intense, is kind of, to a certain extent, masking that Chardonnay notes that we found when it was neat. But it's really long. It's still quite Provençal, and you know, really nice.
It's falling down from the tree, 'cause you are addicted to me.
Okay, so let's move on to the old bear. Let's see what the nose gives us on this one, shall we? Crisper, fresher. Obviously, not having any sherry, you're not getting any of that kind of dried fruit sweetness. So it's kind of allowing the sort of the clarity of the barley notes to kind of come through. Yes, there's a little bit of winey red fruit, but that's right in the background. I mean, I don't know whether that's because the casks were refilled casks, and it would certainly seem to imply that, certainly from the colour as well. I'd expect if this had been aged in first fill Chateauneuf casks, it would have been a lot darker, a lot redder in colour. Again, quite malty. Subtly smoked. Again, it's more a kind of like a sort of a heather, herbally kind of smoke character. And this is where I think it works really nicely. The sort of the peat is not too heavy, and it's kind of working in with that kind of Provençal herbal character that I'm guessing probably must come from the mashing, from the actual barley itself. Quite taut, quite tight, but sort of has a really interesting vibrancy to it, and I think the longer you leave it in the glass, the more the sort of reddish kind of fruits are starting to come out. Let's see what the palate gives us. Oh, it's got a lovely peaty finish. Very dry, very dusty. Again, sweet, sort of heathery kind of laced peat. That's really interesting. It's certainly not got any sort of coastal iodine-y, sort of islery type peat kind of notes, but it doesn't quite have that sort of mainland Scotch barley peaty sort of character either. It's just got a really unique peated note, and quite dry. A little bit of licorice and touch of dried fruits. It's quite tight, but then again, I mean, this is 62.4%, so you'd expect it, but it's got some intensity, it has to be said. So let's stick a drop of water with that one and see what happens. It's softened, it's not quite so intense obviously, it's still got a lovely freshness, a barleyed kind of character, and interestingly enough, this is the weird thing, it's probably brought the peat out a little bit more, which is quite unusual. I mean, more often than not you tend to find with cask strength peated malts that when you put a little bit of water with them, it tends to sort of like soften the peat out rather than emphasise it, but this is certainly seems to have done the opposite. Again, quite young, malty, barleyed. Again, the Provençal herbs are still there. That's got a lovely chocolatey character, almost like a sort of like a chocolate stout. Yeah, that's really nice. Let's see what the palate's doing now. That's a real malt fest, it has to be said. Really full, softly bittering on the finish. The red sort of winey fruits are a little bit more noticeable. The peat has kind of dropped off as you would expect, but it's still there. It's very soft. It's kind of like predominantly in the finish. Again, it has that sort of sweet, heathery kind of characteristic along with the herbal notes as well. It's just really unique, a really interesting whiskey, and it's like I was saying, I mean, it's like nothing else. It's certainly like no Scottish whiskey that that I've ever tasted. I mean maybe I suppose the closest in style would be, say, something like Glengarry, for example. It has that kind of, it has that sort of heathery kind of character, but maybe there's more honey. It's possibly a little bit Oban-y, but it's certainly nowhere near as sweet as Oban. So I mean, if you kind of like that sort of style of whiskey, I think you'd really go for that. This is really very, very good. Right, okay, so let's move on to Donald Trump's whiskey then, shall we? I don't know whether he's actually got a bottle or whether the distillery sent him a case of the stuff. I have absolutely no idea. He's certainly not tweeted about it. I mean, he tweets about everything else, it has to be said, but certainly hasn't tweeted about this. So let's see what those goes. Now, I tasted this blind, and I just naturally assumed that you're bottling something for the American presidency. You would age it in American oak. It just seemed like the thing to do, and it's certainly got quite a sort of vanilla-y kind of character, but it's certainly not that kind of expansive American oak vanilla character. In actual fact, now I know what the cask types are. It's kind of blatantly obvious. Well, no, maybe it's not quite so blatantly obvious. It's certainly got the sort of slightly winey red fruits, which I did pick up on. So I mean, I assumed when tasting it blind that there may be a mixture of cask, but there was going to be predominantly American oak. But like I said, there's certainly no American oak here whatsoever. Again, quite malty, young, herbal. Again, that herbalness, that sort of Provençal herbal character is definitely all there. There's a nice sweetness to it as well, a sort of sweetened creaminess, I guess. Not so much of the sort of chocolatey sort of maltiness. I mean, certainly there is malt there, but it's certainly not as kind of say malty as say the old bear. But yeah, this is just got a wonderful depth to it. Really, really good. So let's see what the palate's like. Wonderfully soft, quite creamy. I'm getting a lot of sort of tight vanilla and Chardonnay notes, quite buttery and full. There's a little bit of spice kind of creeping through right on the finish. Not a huge amount from the Chateau Neuf cask. I'm not getting a huge amount of dried fruit or red fruits or anything like that. I mean, there's a little bit right on the very finish along with that sort of spiciness. Again, lots of herbal character. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. Really quite unique. I like that. That's good. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Winter Wedding. So theoretically, this should be similar to the White House bottling, but there should be a little bit of peat characters, essentially the same combination of casks, but some peated malt. So let's see what those give us. Not so rounded, not so sweet, and not quite so sort of Chardonnay-esque. There's more freshness. It's more akin to the old bear. It has more of that sort of old bear kind of freshness. There's some subtle peat notes. I'm not getting a huge enough amount from the Chateau Neuf. There's a little dried winey red fruits just in the background, but certainly it seems to me that the old bear seems to be the more dominant characteristic of this particular bottling of Winter Wedding. Still malty, still Provençal, herbal, full. Really good. Love this. So let's see what the palate gives. Now initially I'm getting more of the old deer on the palate. It's got more of that sort of dried fruits from the sherry casks. So in actual fact it's not the same as the Winter Wedding. I'm talking rubbish there. It's quite drying. There's some slightly bittering tannins, more of the red winey fruits, the Chateau Neuf casks coming through on the palate. It's got a real spicy finish, real intensity. Quite different to the nose, like I said. I mean, it was on the nose. It was more about the old bear, and certainly on the palate it's more about the old deer. There's a little bit of soft peatiness, but I think that's really well balanced, and just you know, a game of two halves, as they say. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 400 Jahre Kornhaus. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Quite buttery, but not in that sort of sweet butteriness, it has to be said. It's more clarified butter kind of note. Soft, quite appley, white fruits, subtle spice, touch of barley. Certainly the cask is definitely noticeable. Again, there's that sort of slight maltiness, the Provençal herbal character, and when you think about it, it's not. I mean, a lot of European whiskies that are about the same sort of age still just taste far too young. They just don't seem to have any kind of semblance of either oak character or maturity. And although this has a lovely fresh youthful character, there's plenty of oak character, there's plenty of it's not spiky, and it's not, you know, you're not sort of going, oh well, I'm getting lots of kind of off the stilly kind of notes. It's mature enough, shall we say. I mean, yes, I'd like it to be a little bit more mature, but it's just certainly drinkable and sniffable. Yeah, I mean that's a lovely nose, really nice, and it's interesting to sort of see, yeah, how it's not a component. I mean that's the wrong word, but you know, considering they use the Chardonnay cask with a bit of sherry, and it's interesting to sort of see what the Chardonnay cask itself is doing to the spirit without the sherry kind of getting in the way, I suppose, for want of a better word. Anyway, so let's see what the palate's like. Soft, toasty, well, a little bit toasty, slightly malty, quite winey. Again, there's that buttery sort of white fruits. There's a little bit of almost kind of floral notes kind of coming through. Not quite so much the maltiness of the spirit and the herbalness, but they're definitely there. They're sitting in the background. Again, the cask seems to be more dominant on this particular bottling. But it's really balanced. It's not kind of swamped it all. It's not like all you can taste is cask. Yes, that is the dominant aspect of this particular bottling, but certainly the spirit is robust enough and malty enough, and it's got enough character to kind of like, you know, to add its own kind of character to the finished whiskey. So a little bit of pepper now kind of creeping through on the aftertaste. That's a really intriguing, really interesting bottling, and yeah, nice. Right, finally let's take a look at the Jacob's Dram. So single Pinot Noir cask, so hopefully this should be considerably different. Earthy, lots of sweet red cherries, touch of berry fruits, again quite malty, touch of Provençal herbs, but it's got a kind of an edge to it that, say for example, the old deer, not the old bear with its Chateauneuf cask just doesn't seem to have this kind of edginess. Obviously, I would guess that this is probably less well used ex-Pinot cask. There's a touch of vanilla. Again, it's nicely rounded, but that sort of edginess from the cask is kind of just adding that kind of balancing element. Again, malty Provençal herbs, kind of like the classic note of this particular distillery. I mean, literally every bottling has that kind of character, and I'm pretty certain that, you know, in a blind tasting it would be pretty evident if you'd have assuming you'd tasted it before, that it would probably jump out at you as this particular distillery. So wonderfully rounded, but edgy. Like I say, this has just got a lovely balance to it. And again, sort of, there's no butyric notes, there's no sort of like, you know, overt wininess. It's all very soft, and yeah, it's just really nicely balanced. So let's see what the palate's like. Quite bloody good. Wonderfully soft, quite chocolatey in actual fact. Lots of sort of chocolate coated red fruits, cherries, currants, but again malty, herbal, vibrant, balanced. Yeah, that is fantastically good. That is really good. I mean, there's an earthiness, but there's also a polish and a class to this particular whiskey, and that's what I love about it. It is really, really complex. You've got all these elements going on. It's not just kind of, you know, all about the finishing, or not necessarily the finishing cask, the maturing cask, I should say. And you know, that's the thing with aging in wine casks. You know, you never really know. I suppose, you know, if it's been sort of, you know, refilled, reused, you know that the winey character is going to be not as intense as it was if it was, you know, a first fill Pinot Noir cask, for argument's sake. So, but anyway, I'm waffling, and all I can say is that's bloody good, really very, very good. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show up. Well, like I said from the off, I love the Langatun whiskies. I think they are absolutely fabulous. Ever since I sort of like first encountered them, I thought, you know, this is something really different, really interesting. And I mean, whether it says it speaks of its place, whether it speaks of Switzerland is kind of, you know, point I suppose you could argue, but it just is different. And the old deer, yeah, I mean, that's again, you know, interesting use of different casks, really balanced. You're getting both the Chardonnay and the sherry cask notes, or it kind of flips on the palate, so that it's a little bit the other way around. But even so, just a really good whiskey. I love the Old Bear. I love the sort of like the more crisp character. I'd like to see Langatun in purely in American oak, maybe 10 or 12 years old, just to sort of see kind of, you know, what it's like in American oak. To be honest with you, I think it would be, you know, close to the Old Bear. I think it would have that sort of crisp, fresh kind of character. I mean, like I said, bearing in mind this is triple distilled spirit, but it has a real maltiness, a real density, and it's like the Hazelburn. Again, you know, it's a triple distilled spirit, but it has a real weight to it. It's not sort of like, you know, evanescent and light and sort of what have you. There's still some real maltiness and density to the spirit, so it's like, you know, really, really interesting. The White House, yeah, like I said, really interesting, pleasant bottling, and yeah, intriguing. Like I said, I mean, to me, when I first sort of tasted it, I thought it was, you know, maybe there were some wine casks, but I thought there was you know, a fair amount of American oak, but it turns out there isn't. So sometimes you, yeah, okay. Anyway, the Winter Wedding, yeah, again, sort of like really interesting, a nice blend of the Old Bear and the Old Deer. Like on the Old Deer, it's kind of like, you know, the nose and the palate was sort of showing the two completely different sides, with the one spirit being more emphasised on the nose and the other one on the palate, which I thought was really interesting, because, you know, it's kind of like, it's nothing like sort of smelling something and thinking, yeah, that's kind of nice, and then tasting it and going, oh, bloody hell, it's completely the other way around, you know. Yeah, so interesting stuff. Certainly worth getting your hands on a bottle. The 400-year Kornhaus, yeah, not just interesting, different to see, just purely aged in an ex-Chardonnay cask. Softer, butterier, rounder, as you would expect, but again, displaying all the Langatun kind of character that we've come to expect from tasting their whiskey. And Jacob's Dram, which is arguably my favourite of all of these, certainly of the four limited edition bottlings. Just really well balanced, you know, not overly winey, but having enough wine kind of character to sort of make it kind of interesting, but without sort of swamping the distillery character. So yeah, and like I said, doesn't taste young and spirity, and sort of certainly doesn't feel like it's been bottled at too young a age, which is not something you can say about a lot of the European whiskies and some of the Australian and New Zealand whiskies as well. I think there's always a bit of a rush to get your product out there, but at the end of the day, there's no getting around time, shall we say. Sometimes you just need to leave your spirit in the cask until it's ready, rather than rushing out the bottling. But certainly in this instance, I don't think that is an issue. I really love what the distillery are doing, and I really think that if you're into your whiskies, you're into different whiskies, get your hands on a bottle. I mean, the 46% bottling, I think it's 50 cl, is what, just it's 49 quid, something like that. So it's par for the course for European whiskies, shall we say, but the cask strength bottlings are a little bit more expensive. They're in the 60s, I think, but certainly I think getting your hands on a bottle of the 46% bottling, if you're interested, is a good idea. So there you go. That's this week's episode of the show in the bag. Hope you've enjoyed it. So I guess all that's left to say is good afternoon and good dramming.